chat from we apologize for the previous week. There's some little bit technical glitches, but I think that's a siman mina shamayim, a great sign that we must be doing something good, because if the Yetzer Hara, if the evil inclination is fighting against something and there's some difficulties, I think we're hopefully on the right track. That's in my Lania's diet, in my opinion. But I think we want to welcome everyone to this special series, Hilchot Shabbat, Hilchot Shabbos, the laws of Shabbos refresher course with Rabbi Shay Tahan Shlita every week, every Wednesday night. We're honored to hear from Rabbi Shay Tahan, 8 p.m. every week on chazak.org/live, chazaq.org/live, chazak.org/live. It should be your fortunately of Anna El Bat Rivka. Should have a complete fortunately of Akarov. And above your screen, you can see a question, a chat box. You can submit your question on the laws of Shabbos, something that Rabbi Tahan hopefully we'll speak about tonight. Any question on that, or any in general, any question about the laws of Shabbos, you can either put in the chat box above your screen over here, or you can also email us if it's easier for you. Email us to events@chazak.org. That is spelled events@chazaq.org, events@chazak.org. And again, please share this link right now to your friends and family, so you can all learn so many tremendous insights and laws about the vastness of laws of Shabbos. Without further ado, Rabbi Shay Tahan Shlita, thank you again, Rabbi, for doing this series. We really appreciate it.
Chazak u'baruch. And we are again on Hilchot Bishul. Just today, we're going to do a new topic in Hilchot Bishul. In Hilchot Bishul, we also have other things that Chazal added to the law of cooking on Shabbat, restrictions to the simple melacha of cooking, and that falls under what we call Chazara, Hatmana, and today we're going to speak about Shahia. Last week, or 2 weeks ago rather, we spoke about Chazara. Chazara means you want to put back something on the fire, on the hot plate, on the blech. What are the conditions? We said there are conditions. You can't just put anything back. You took it off the blech, you took it off the hot plate, and now you want to return it and you want to put it there. Is that permitted or is not permitted? We said that if you meet certain conditions, it would be permitted. Today, we want to speak about the Dean of Shahia. What is Shahia? Shahia means you leave something from before Shabbat on the hot plate or in the oven, and now on Shabbat, you're going to eat it. There's also restrictions that we need to learn that has to do with the law of Shahia, leaving something from before Shabbat. Also, it's not as simple as it sounds, although normally whatever you do from before Shabbat and it goes through Shabbat, halacha permits. Like for instance, the person is allowed to leave his electrical devices, his air conditioner, whatever he wants, the electricity from before Shabbat, and he runs through Shabbat, even if he uses all kind of Shabbat modes, or he uses all kind of different timers that would turn it on and off. Everything that was prepared from before Shabbat is permitted to use on Shabbat. That is the halacha. And this is true, but when we deal with the laws of Bishul, all of a sudden there's few extra restrictions. Why is that? The Chachamim explained that people were lahut achrei ma'achalam. People love food. People get excited when they see food. And then once you deal with food, you have to be extra cautious. Why? Because then a person has like a blank in his mind, and he comes to do something he shouldn't do because all he's thinking about is food. And that is what we're talking about over here as well. The Dean of Shahia, leaving something on the fire from before Shabbat, although you're leaving it there and it's going to get cooked on Shabbat, and that's fine. Midin Torah. Chachamim restricted in certain scenarios. Why? Because Shema Yechate, you might come to see your food on Shabbat, and you see that the food is not fully cooked yet, and you want to eat it soon. So you come to play with the ashes. At the time, there was ashes under the fire, under the plate, under the pot. It would be fire. It would be like an oven with coals inside. And whenever you wanted the fire to get higher, to burn higher, you would go and play with the coals a little bit, and that would cause the coals to light the fire higher. And that is not allowed to do on Shabbat, because you're doing over here two things. First of all, it's melechet avara, you turning on a fire higher. That's not permitted on Shabbat. Secondly, you're causing the food to be cooked quicker, and that is melechet bishul, cooking on Shabbat. That's not permitted. So therefore, Chachamim restricted even leaving the food on the fire from before Shabbat, because we're afraid of what I just said, that people will come to play with the fire, Shema Yechate. That is only when a person puts something that is not cooked yet. But if it is cooked, then we're not afraid that a person would come to play with it, because it's already cooked or very close to be cooked. That is permitted. What is that? There's a machloket in the Gemara between Chachamim and Hananya. How much can it be cooked in order to be able to leave it on the fire? Now we're talking about straight up fire. You have your stove and you put the pot straight on the fire without any separation. How much does it need to be cooked? According to Chachamim, it needs to be fully cooked in order to be able to leave it on the fire, and it also shouldn't be mitbashel vetovlo, and mitztamek vetovlo, which means the cooking doesn't add positive flavor, positive cooking to it. That is, in that case, if it's not mitztamek vetovlo, but rather it's as natural and mitztamek veralo, Chachamim said in that scenario you'll be able to leave it straight on the fire. But Hananya said that no, it could also be permitted once it's cooked kema'achal ben dosai. Now we spoke about ben dosai in the past. We explained that ben dosai is a term taken from a person that used to live in the time of Chachamim, that was a thief and used to eat his food since he was always on the run because the authorities was chasing over him. Therefore, he was always on the run and he would not be able to sit and eat his food comfortably, but rather as soon as the food would be edible, he would take it, gobble it, and keep on running away. How much does it need to be cooked? There's machloket over here, the Rambam and Rashi, whether it is cooked half or whether it is cooked to the third. Rashi says a third is sufficient. That's called kemachal ben dosai. Rambam says you need to have half cooked in order for it to be called kemachal ben dosai. Lemase, what's the halacha? The Mishnah Berurah says you need to have over here the food cooked lechatchila until half, like the Rambam, not a third. No, don't be lenient like Rashi, but rather half. That is the amount of kemachal ben dosai. The Rabbi is posek like this halacha, that if you have something that was half cooked, or the Rabbi doesn't say half cooked, he says kemachal ben dosai, but according to what we just explained right now, it's half cooked. That's sufficient, and now you can leave it on the fire, and that is called Shahia hamuteret. It's permitted because it was half cooked. If a person is bedochak, he has guests, he has to have the food, he doesn't have the time, so then he could also be lenient on the third. But lechatchila he should be lenient only with half cooked. That is the opinion of the Remah. According to Shulchan Aruch, you can't rely on Hananya, that kemachal ben dosai is sufficient to leave the food on the fire, but rather it needs to be completely cooked. But although the Shulchan Aruch is what the Sfaradim follow, and the Ramah is what the Ashkenazim follow, but over here, the Minhag Sfaradim says, Eretz HaChaim Saton, that it is enough to have third cooked. This is what Chacham Ovadia brings down, or Litzion brings down, Kaf HaChaim, which means the Minhag Sfaradim is like the Ramah over here, to be lenient with kemachal ben dosai, which again, it's either half cooked or third cooked, Machloket Rashi and the Rambam. Once you have that amount, you're allowed to leave it on the blech, on the fire. If you don't, if it's not cooked to that amount, it's less than that, you need to have a hot plate, or you need to have a blech. You need to have the fire covered, what we call in the Gemara, grufa vektuma. Grufa means the ashes were removed from the place, So if you're using, let's say, a stovetop, at the time of Chazal, it would be an oven that, on a kira called, that you put the food on top of that structure that looked like an oven with coals inside. You would have the pot on top. Such a thing needs to be either grufa, which means you remove the ashes, or ktuma, you cover the ashes with sand. So over here, we cover the fire. How do we cover the fire? We put a blech on top of the fire. That's where you see those blech around the houses on top of the flames. And that would be sufficient to be able to leave something that is not cooked on the fire on Shabbat. If it is not cooked, you'll have to have that fire covered. That's not according to all opinions. If we want to start with the history of how this hot plate started, there was a machloket over it. According to the Chazon Ish, it wouldn't be sufficient. Why not? Because Chazon Ish says that the purpose of covering the ashes with the sand was to lower the flame. That's what would happen when you put sand on the ashes. But when you put a hot plate, you put the plata, the metal plate on top of the flame on the stove, that doesn't reduce the heat of the flame. The flame is the same, it's just covered. Such a thing is not permitted, says the Chazon Ish. But la halacha, the poskim permitted, and the minhag haolam is to permit. Got Moshe explains that even according to Machloket Rambam and Rashi, Machloket in the Rishonim already, whether you're allowed to be masheh, you're allowed to put food from before Shabbat on top of such a fire that is covered. Rashi was machmir. The Rambam was mekel, he was lenient. Rashi was strict. He said, you're not allowed. Says the Grot Moshe Feinstein, that here, even Rashi would agree. The reason they didn't allow covering the fire just with some type of metal plate or anything else, the reason Rashi was strict is because over there it was very common to do that. You would have, as I explained, this structure they called kira, and you would put on top something in order to be able to put on top of that the pot. And since that was a normal way to use it, therefore it wouldn't be a hekel, wouldn't look any different, and people would not remember and come to play with the coals. But today that you're putting such a blech, such a metal piece on top of the flame, anybody sees that the reason it's there is because it's Shabbat. So as soon as you come to play with the fire, oh, you remember that, and you're not gonna do something that's not permitted. Also, the God Moshe explained that the reason is because it would be a hole in that kira that you wouldn't be able to put the plate, the whatever you're using, the pot, it would fall down. So therefore, they would put something there, and since it would be normal to put such a thing, so therefore, it would not be sufficient. But today, again, that you're putting something that's totally not like that, you're putting something that's totally not used on weekday, covering the fire like that, that would be permitted. That takes us to a hot plate, electric hot plate that we use on Shabbat. Are you allowed to use that? Also, if we say that it's normal for people to cook on a hot plate, so then it shouldn't be permitted. And that is the opinion of Rav Eliashiv, that since hot plate is made to put food on it and cook on it, that's not a Jewish invention, hot plate. You'll find it in Macy's and in Sears and in other places. You want a hot plate, they'll sell it to you. It's there on the shelf for sale. So therefore, since it's a normal thing that one uses in order to cook his food, you want it to be there for a long time and let it cook. So therefore, there's no heker, there's nothing that expresses and shows that it's made for Shabbat, and you're going to come to play with the electricity over there, whether it's a knob that you'll turn higher, or even if you said there's nothing there, but since Chachamim restricted that, it's not permitted. That is the opinion of Rav Eliashiv. Many poskim felt that it's not a normal thing to use a hot plate at all. And this is how Chacham Ovadia says, this is how Shlomo Zalman Auerbach said. It's not normal to use a hot plate at all. And the reason you put a hot plate shows you very clearly, you don't use this on a weekday, shows you very clearly that the reason you're using it is because it's Shabbat and you to remind you, and you're not going to come to play with anything over there. Again, playing with the buttons, even if you don't have any of those buttons in order to turn it higher, any of the knobs to turn them higher, still Chachamim restricted that, whether you have that or no, that is not permitted, although there are those that want to make chilukim in that. That takes us to the halakha of covering the knobs. Some poskim say it's correct to cover the knobs. Some say that that's all you need. You don't even need to cover the fire. It's enough to cover the knobs. It's brought down like this from the Rosh Yeshiva of Lakewood, of Aaron Kotler, Zatzal, that it's sufficient to cover the knobs. But Moshe Feinstein brought that it's not sufficient. You have to cover the fire itself, just like it was in the original Gzerah, to cover the fire itself. But he ended up saying that it's correct also to cover the knobs as well. That's where you see many times that those plata, those plates, those metal plates go this way. They go straight on top and cover the flame, and then it goes down to cover the knobs as well. You see that it has that structure. It's just that straight. It goes down at the end to cover the knobs as well when you put it on top of the stove. That is the reason you do that. Others feel that it's not needed to do so much. It's enough that you cover the flame. That is sufficient. Now, when we're dealing with hot plate, we said before, is a machloket. But when you have the knob, do you have to cover it as well? Some people, that's the reason you'll see they put an aluminum foil on the knobs to cover them as well, to be choshesh for those shitot. We just said that Moshe Feinstein was machmir to use both things in order to get both things. One is to cover the fire, lechatchila, also to cover the knobs as well. That is the din that he explained. That is, again, only when you're using something that is not cooked yet, not even to the point of kemachal ben dorsai, because if it is kemachal ben dorsai, Mikar Adin la'alacha, you're allowed to keep it straight on the fire without a problem, because we're not afraid since it's ready to eat. So you're not going to come to play with it on Shabbat. Now, when we're dealing with Ma'achal ben dorsai, let's just give a little bit of understanding. How do you measure Ma'achal ben dorsai? Let's say it's a third for argument's sake, as Rashi explained, it needs to be a third cooked. We said before that you can rely on Rashi, and it's a third. So how you measure third of cooking? How do you know something is measured correctly? Chazon Ish explained that the reason that the way you measure it is you start from the time that the food gets to the point of Yad Soledet, because that is when it starts cooking. Before it gets to the point of Yad Soledet, the food is not yet on the process of cooking, as long as the water, you put chicken in the water. So right now, before it gets to the point of Yad Soledet, we explained the Yad Soledet is a heat level of between 40 to 45 degrees. In Celsius, we said that it's about 40 to 45, which takes us to Fahrenheit around 113. When you have such an amount that gets to Yad Soledet, that is when the cooking process actually starts. And therefore, when you have that heat level, you'll start measuring from that time until you consider it fully cooked. So if, let's say, it takes to cook chicken like that half an hour, 30 minutes, so 10 minutes will be considered kemachal ben dorsai. Kaf HaChaim holds that you can't measure like that. The measurement is incorrect, and we don't know how to measure a third, but rather you'll have to actually see when the food is edible, even bedochak, even though it's not something that you would want to eat like that, you wouldn't serve it like that. But if you had no time, you had to run now, you have to catch a train, you have to catch a plane, You have to run to a meeting. That's an important meeting. You had to run. Can you eat it like that, or you can't eat it? If you can gobble it like that and eat it, even though you don't enjoy it, but it's edible already, that is considered kemachal ben dosai, and that is sufficient. When we're dealing with food, that would be the shiur. When we're dealing with liquid has the same dinim. You want to put water in the urn. So that water also has the same problem in the urn, because when you put water that's not cooked in the urn and you leave it cooking on Shabbat, you have the same issue. What is the problem over there? We're afraid that when you put water in the urn and it's not yet cooked, you might want to take a little bit of water from the urn, and what you're doing is you are causing the water now to be cooked quicker, faster. That is clearly bishul on Shabbat midoraita. Whenever you quicken the cooking of anything on Shabbat, that falls under the category of bishul on Shabbat. It's called ziruz bishul, mihur bishul. That is not permitted. So therefore, that is a concern that we have when the water is not cooked in the urn. You have to try to cook it beforehand. How do you measure cooking in water? So the Shulchan Aruch says that you cook from the time that you put it in the urn, let's say, or on the fire. Let's say you're putting kettle on the stove. From the minute you put it there until it starts bubbling, it starts boiling. So how long does it take from the time you put it there until that is the measurement you do, and you take a third of that according to the opinion that Ben Dosai is a third. Chazon Ish says that again, you don't measure from the time you put it on the stove or in the urn, because it's not yet cooking. When does cooking actually starts? When it gets to the point of Yad Soledet. Before you've reached Yad Soledet, you're not there yet, and therefore you don't have to worry about it. What Moshe said, that cooking is Bachal Ben Dosai, is actually when you reached out the point of Yad Soledet. So you have over here different opinions. Best thing is try to put the water a little bit before, that it should at least get to a third of the time of cooking from the moment that it started getting to Yad Soledet. That's because you gaining the opinion of the Chazon Ish, which is the most machmir, and with this way you have no issues whatsoever. So this is in order to stay away from problems. Now there is another din that's brought down in the poskim, and that is that the Gemara already brings down, and that is putting a piece of meat in the pot. You have a pot over here. Let's say you have pot that left on a fire, on an open fire. And again, we're talking just open fire. If you're putting it on a blech, on a hot plate, or anything like that, even if you have a crock pot is something you normally cook in. So therefore, you should really put under the crock pot silver foil, and that would express and show that it is garuf, it's covered. But if your chulent in the crock pot is already cooked or even third cooked, you don't need to do any of that. That's not needed, because it is kemachal ben dosai. So when are we saying it's only asur? When you're putting straight on a fire and the thing is not cooked yet, kemachal ben dosai. Only then it's asur. Once it's kemachal ben dosai, you can leave it on open fire, and once you have a hot plate, you don't have to worry. You can leave there whatever you want. Hot plate, cover the fire in any form or way, whether it is the plata. You can put the food over there uncooked, no problem. But now it's a different scenario. You're living right now, you have a pot with food in there, and it's not yet kemachal ben dosai. So therefore, and it's almost Shabbat, you want to put it, and you don't have a way how to cover the fire. So how could you leave it on the fire? Chachamim said if you put inside a piece of meat, that would be sufficient. Why? because that piece of meat would not be ready by the time the night comes. And since it's not ready by the time the night comes, for sure it's Masiach Dat. You leave your mind off it until the next day. And therefore, you're allowed to put it like that because we know for sure you're not going to play around with the ashes, Shema Echateh. You don't have to worry that you're going to do any of that. So that is a solution. Remember, when you do that, normally we accept Shabbat a little bit early. So the piece of meat can't start cooking by the time it is Shkia. So if you are accepting Shabbat already 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes before Shkia, you run to shul and you put a piece of meat over there, by then it starts cooking. That's not going to help this leniency. Some poskim say, it's brought down from Moshe Mazam and Orbach and others, that today this whole leniency doesn't apply because it used to be different in the time of Chazal than today. The time of Chazal, when you left a piece of meat, you would come right after an hour later to eat it because you go to shul, you come home and you eat it right away. Today, since a person stretches the meals very much, by the time he comes back from shul, time is ticking. And then he sits down and he says in lengthy Eshet Chayil and Shalom Aleichem. He sits down, he gives brachot to the children, and then he sits and eats the salads first and a piece of kugel and the maza, and then he has a soup. And by the time he gets to it, he can get already to the point of cooking, and therefore it's not Masiach Dat. He doesn't turn away his head from it, his mind out of it, because he still has that in mind, because it might be ready by the time he's prepared to eat the main course. And therefore, that doesn't apply at all. Some say that. If a person wants to take that chumrah, that would be the correct thing to do. This is a rundown of Hilchot Shahia on Shabbat. If Rabbi is with us, usually he's not, but today, let's see if he's with us. We can take the questions because he's the only one that sees the questions. I don't see the questions. So going once, going twice. I think Rabbi is not with us, and we do appreciate everybody for joining us for this crash course. Chazak uvaru.